Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Welcome if you're new, and thank you for joining your favorite, I hope, lawyer from a land far, far away, also known as Australia. Speaking of being so far away, sometimes I feel so out of the loop because this is actually an emergency video. I never film at night. It's nighttime, and I have just learned that Amber Heard's camp have made another filing about juror number 15. So this is actually a follow-up from a video that I posted last week about the initial filing for the post-trial motions, where this issue of juror number 15 was mentioned, but it was tentative. They didn't know for certain that juror number 15 was apparently not the juror that was meant to serve during the defamation trial in Virginia. Of course, the personal information such as the name and the exact date of birth of the juror has been redacted in the filing because we're not meant to know who they are for at least a year. But it appears that they have confirmed that juror number 15, who was meant to serve, so the juror who was summoned for duty, was born in 1945, as we discussed last week. That would make them 77 years old. However, according to Amber's team, when the trial started, a much younger 52-year-old ended up serving as juror number 15. And to make matters more, I suppose, interesting, both jurors live at the same address. So this would mean that the juror who served was never summoned and violated Virginia's code by appearing and serving despite never being named in the list. So they're alleging that this essentially violated Virginia's code, which requires the clerk, the court clerk, to verify the identities of every single juror that serves during a trial. And so, much like they stated in the initial post-trial motions from last week, they allege that Amber Heard's due process was therefore compromised. And so, they're demanding that a mistrial be declared and a new trial ordered. Now, I don't have access to Johnny's response to their initial post-trial motion, but a footnote in this submission tells me that Johnny argued that Amber waived this argument by not bringing it up during the voir dire process where the lawyers had a chance to interview the jurors. As I explained in last week's video, a voir dire in this instance would be a pretrial hearing where the jurors are interviewed one by one in order to determine, any bias, any relation to the parties, anything that can impact their ability to serve impartially. Now, their response to the argument that you should have raised this in voir dire is that the voir dire questions that they were allowed to ask the jurors were ruled on in advance and that they were limited to these questions in particular, so they couldn't deviate, is what they're saying. But they go further and say that, hey, it wasn't our responsibility to vet the jurors. It wasn't our responsibility to confirm or verify their identities. It was the responsibility of the court as per the Virginia Code. And so due process would entitle Amber Heard and other litigants to put trust and faith in the court to do the right thing, and that Amber should have been able to rely on this notion of the court doing the right thing and this basic assurance that the jurors are who they say they are. I don't know about this argument. I mean, 52 and 77, that's a huge discrepancy. And I'm still unclear about which juror showed up during the voir dire where they were questioned. Was it the 77-year-old who was summoned? Or was it the younger 52-year-old who they allege just randomly showed up in trial and was obviously significantly younger? Because if the 52-year-old showed up for the voir dire, then honestly, who's not going to raise that? I mean, even if it was beyond the scope of the questions that were ruled on, who in their right mind would just sit there and let this discrepancy slip once it's been noticed? There's a gap here that I'm just not understanding. When was this noticed and why wasn't it raised earlier? This isn't something you just let slip. It is quite serious for someone to show up and serve as a jury member when they were never summoned. And let's say that the 77-year-old showed up for the voir dire questioning, but then when the trial started, it was the 52-year-old as they allege. How was it not raised then? There were so many opportunities, so many instances very early on for this quite serious issue, or I suppose confusing issue, this confounding discrepancy to be raised with the court. Did they purposely hold on to it as a trump card in case Amber lost? I'm wondering about the legitimacy of it because it just seems a bit too convenient for it to just pop up now that she's lost. I can't get over the fact that this never came up until July the 1st of 2022. So an entire month after the verdict was rendered. We'll just have to wait and see what comes of this. This is only getting more and more complicated rather than being resolved after the verdict. I'm gonna leave it there for this video. Of course, this is very much to be continued. The next upload will be the podcast, where we do not touch upon this, even though we filmed today, earlier in the day, because I didn't know. I have a couple of videos lined up to cover the Brooks versus Johnny Depp personal injury, assault, battery case as well, since that's pending on the 25th of July. That's when it's going to start in California. So stay tuned for that as well. And yes, we'll see where this case takes us next. Thank you for tuning in. Take care, and I'll see you next time.